What's going on, guys? We're at Westside Barbell, and this is another installment of Bromley Hates. So today I want to pick apart speed work. It's become a very popular installment in popular training culture. You see it in a lot of newbies training programs, and it's something that I think people take for granted as something that you should do, and they don't really think about it or know why. Speed work specifically, I'm going to be talking about the dynamic effort, which is really specifically based off the recommendations that Louis Simmons makes from Westside. Now I got to be clear, there are other modes of training for speed. There are other reasons to train for speed. This is not an indictment of all speed work in general. If you're an athlete, if you're an Olympic lifter, if for whatever reason you engage in an activity that benefits rate of force development and moving very quick and explosively, of course speed work is important. I'm talking specifically about using speed work as a means of improving your strength. Now I'm going to make that case on why I think that goes the other way around. But first we're going to do a little bit of a crash course on how the human body works. So, I mean, you've seen every bald, fat power lifter that runs a seminar, come up and write force equals mass times acceleration, and then that goes into the discussion of speed work. I think that's very lazy and it's pseudoscientific. And one of the big reasons is that that's just a definition. Okay, that tells you how force is defined. It's defined as mass times acceleration. It doesn't tell you dick about how the human body works. So to start off with how the human body works, we're going to go over how we produce force to begin with. So our body is composed of muscles. These muscles are innervated by nerves. Each muscle fiber has these little sarcomeres, and each sarcomere is made up of these strands that run alongside each other of myosin and actin. So as a nerve hits the sarcomere and prompts it to contract, basically the actin and myosin, it's called sliding, but it's like a hook and pull, and then they release. And there's a hook and pull, and then they release. And that all happens incredibly fast, many, many times. And that's what gives us this fluid ability to move, is how that gets coordinated. These sarcomeres, each muscle fiber, it gets recruited on an all or nothing principle. You can't kind of recruit a muscle fiber. It recruits or it doesn't. So the way that we go very slow and fluid and with finesse versus moving very quickly and explosively, it has to do with how many we recruit all at once. So with the different muscle fiber types, we have small slow twitch fibers, which the type 1s, which are endurance fibers, those get recruited first. That allows us to move regularly because they're more efficient, so we don't burn ourselves out doing simple day-to-day stuff. So the size principle says we recruit those first, and then as time goes on, or as we have a demand for more effort, more intensity, more speed, we recruit bigger and bigger fibers. We also have this idea of low threshold and high threshold fibers, which, let's say I start out with a set of 10 on bench. The first couple, I'm using the fibers that are readily available. As those start to fatigue, the nervous system starts to branch out and recruit other fibers. Those are the high threshold fibers. So when you hear a bodybuilder talk about wanting to recruit more muscle fibers, wanting to use some fatigue technique or some, change up the angle or do something different to recruit these unused fibers, those are the high threshold fibers. And that's what most of strength training is kind of oriented to, is trying to find growth in areas that have previously not been growing. So doing sets to failure, even doing sets with a lot of weight, is one way that you get those high threshold fibers. So to reiterate, fast just means recruiting more motor units in less time. When we're considering your ability to be strong or even to be explosive, we take into account the highest percentage or the highest number of muscle fibers you can recruit. It's a completely arbitrary number, but imagine you have two guys that are twins. They have the same amount of muscle mass, same limbs, leverages, whatever. You have guy A can recruit 50% of his available motor units. Guy B can recruit 75%. That explains how you get wildly different performances from people who are essentially in the same weight class or have the same build, same amount of muscle mass. A small guy can get very, very strong if he's more efficient. So recruiting more motor units is one. Now, in addition to that, you want to be able to recruit those motor units in a very short period of time. So that's what we call rate of force development. How long does it take you to get to that point? Now, having a really good, really short rate of force development is what makes elite Olympic lifters or elite sprinters as good as they are. The fact that they can go from 0 to 100 very quickly. Taking all this into account, these are the principles that govern how the human body moves, how we recruit motor units and apply force for a variety of activities. The idea with Westside prescription, as most of us know speed work as it pertains to the gym, You're around 50 to 60%. You're doing a lot of sets, doubles and triples, trying to go as quick as you can. The idea is that with this simple explanation of force equals mass times acceleration, that if we have the same mass and we can train to move with greater acceleration, that our force production goes up. Now, you can't really argue that on the face of it. If you have two guys that bench press 500 pounds and one moves it like a gunshot and the other moves it slow and grindy, the guy that moves it quick produces more force. That's just science. That's physics. That is what it is. The question is taking into account how the human body works and how it recruits fibers. If the grindy guy moves a 510 that was just as slow as a 500 and the speedy guy hits a stick point and comes right back down, who wins the powerlifting meet? So I'm not alone on this. I actually started thinking about all this watching a podcast with Dave Tate and J.M. Blakely recently, and J.M. Blakely made his case that was very similar.
How many maximal lifts we've ever seen that moved any faster than a snail's pace? The answer is zero. I'll just go ahead and tell you the answer. The law of sports specificity says that you get better at what you practice. So practicing moving weights very, very fast doesn't have much to do with your single rep max. The law of sports specificity says I should practice moving this the way I'm going to move it when I perform it. So that was my thinking.
Sport specificity for powerlifting is not to be the fastest guy there because you don't get rewarded for it. You get rewarded for moving the biggest loads. So this is only as important as it helps you to move bigger and bigger loads. Well, since every max effort movement is ultimately going to go at a snail's pace, is there really value in doing this? Does it really make you stronger and help you lift more weight? I'm making the case that it doesn't, and J.M. Blakely actually agrees with me. This idea that strength leads speed is part of what formulates my argument. If you want to move 500 pounds fast, if that's your goal for whatever reason, you have to be able to move it first. And if you do move 500 pounds fast, there's always some implication that you have more left in the tank. A true max effort lift is never going to be fast. So part of the rationale that explained the necessity for speed work to begin with was this idea, okay, you get a weight going, you hit a stick point, you can't make it through, it comes back down. Well, hey, if I moved a little faster at the start, I would have momentum at the stick point. I'd be able to then glide through that stick point and ram the weight to lockout. So more speed is going to help me cut through stick points. I would maintain, given the analogy of the speedy 500-pound bencher and the grindy 500-pound bencher, that if you have a guy that moves 500 pounds quick but can't move 510, to me, that's a shortcoming of muscular endurance and someone who doesn't know how to grind. Grinding is very important in powerlifting. You have to be able to know how to position yourself, how to last, how to produce that maximal force long enough to complete the lift. And when you get stuck, there's a skill to learning exactly how to inch that weight up by moving into stronger and stronger mechanical positions until you can ram it to lockout. If you're used to just hitting the hole and popping up and you have no sense of where the weight's going, you're not going to do well. So I could just as easily make the case that if you're having trouble with the stick point, it's because you don't know how to grind. You might have some weakness there that needs to be addressed, but you probably don't have the endurance to be able to sustain that force production long enough to complete the lift, which means you need to get stronger, which is the crux of all of this. So if we're going to break down the Westside prescription, let's look at what happens as far as muscle growth is concerned with all of these other protocols. So if we're looking at heavy, so keep in mind that to grow, you need mechanical tension. So we're talking about the actin and myosin grabbing. That's mechanical tension. Now, to grow, you need that optimized. So mechanical tension is optimized when you are lifting heavy, let's say somewhere above 80%, or if you're lifting light to a point of fatigue or close to muscular failure. And the reason being is with the heavier loads and with the fatigued reps, you are actually moving slow enough to keep the actin and myosin under that mechanical tension. When things move too fast, there's actually lower mechanical tension because they grab and release too quick. And in a lot of explosive movements, actually momentum and kinetic energy does a lot of the work. It's not the actual muscle being mechanically loaded, mechanically tense. That's what causes growth. So with heavy 80% and up, we have maximal force production, all right? So you can actually generate maximal force with these heavier loads. The problem with force equals mass times acceleration is the way the human body works. You physically cannot move these lighter percentages fast enough. You can't accelerate fast enough to get maximal force production. And the amount of time it takes to complete a speed rep, that's shorter than the actual physical amount of time it takes for your body to recruit its optimal number of motor units to produce maximal force. So bottom line, speed work, it's too fast. You can't produce maximal force within the time it takes you to complete a speed rep. So it's not sport specific from that aspect. Heavy work, there is more mechanical loading, again, because you're slowed down by the load of the weight. So the actin and myosin, those filaments, they stay mechanically loaded, which is a really important box that has to be checked for muscle growth. Also, it's sport-specific technique. As the loads get heavier, you're able to more closely reinforce the type of technique and the type of pacing you need to keep on a maximal lift. Because you're engaging in maximal force production, you're going to be recruiting those high threshold units, which again, it's important for growth and it's important for increasing the efficiency of your nervous system to be able to recruit these satellite units. Okay, so now we go down to lighter work, under 80%, and we're going to fatigue. We're going close to muscular failure. So again, as the weight moves slower, you got better mechanical loading. As you start to fatigue, as you get a substrate deficit, your nervous system is going to try and reach out and recruit and activate those other motor units that aren't being used. So again, you recruit high threshold motor units, which is important for growth. And it reinforces technique. As you slow down and as you start to fatigue, you have to stay in that position that's going to get you the best possible outcome, or you are not going to be able to complete the lift. So slow fatigued reps are just as important for building a solid technical base as really heavy reps are. So now we go into the light range without fatigue. We're now just doing speed. We're doing the 50 to 60%, multiple sets, just a few reps. Low mechanical loading because the catch and release happens too quickly with the actin and myosin. Low force production, we just established that it is physically impossible. And here it is a chart popped up in a Brett Contreras article that establishes you physically cannot generate maximal force with light explosive efforts. The technique is non-specific. This is a big one. When you see guys do their bench work and they're trying to clip it off, like they're physically trying to get 3 reps out in under a second, that technique is not even remotely close to what you do under a heavy load. It's light, you can muscle it around, the free fall and then catch and throw, that kind of ballistic, plyometric type of training. It does not represent what you do under a maximal attempt whatsoever. And in fact, I would argue strongly, it can create really bad habits. Same thing with a squat, same thing with a deadlift. Every time you see somebody reach down on a 135 bar and just ram it to lockout where the bar shoots out in front of their hips, there's some good guys that do it. That doesn't mean it's an intelligent training tactic. That is not the position you are going to maintain under maximal loads. Again, because force production's low, you're not taking it to fatigue, you don't recruit high threshold units. So as far as any type of growth or adaptive qualities are concerned, you're gonna really leave a lot on the table. So some of the rationales that kind of explained all this away, and I've gotten a lot of these, is it okay, well, it's not so much about building the speed as helping a 1 rep max, it is okay, it's extra recovery work. Well, this is a very, very, very specific protocol, and the protocol was designed specifically based on this idea of increasing rate of force development and getting you to fire off more motor units at once, and that was somehow going to help you with maximal loading. So there's a million ways to do recovery work. It's a little bit disingenuous to say that, well, that's the main function of this, given how specific the recommendations really are. The rationalization is, well, it allows you to get extra volume in without beating yourself up. Okay, fair enough. It's a lighter day, especially if it's Westside approved and it's max effort versus dynamic effort. But the extra volume isn't really substantial enough to do anything. I mean, we just established that you're not really checking any of these boxes for growth and development. So that extra volume, it must not be substantial.
I think it's important to consider too that there's probably people who are watching this that are saying, well, dynamic effort days are high volume, 10, 12 sets of 2 or 3 reps. And the idea that dynamic effort work is high volume, we're looking at 36 total reps, 12 triples at 60%. Compared to the type of hypertrophy work that I'm doing, that I'm prescribing to my athletes, that's less than half what a lot of people are doing, and they're doing multiple sessions of that a week.
And I've had people say, oh, well, you put the accommodating resistance on, it's 75% at the top, 75% for, you're looking at 20, 24 reps, like that's a good amount of volume. So if you think that that's comparable to 75% straight weight for all those repetitions, then I would challenge you to do a little test with yourself. Go set up the accommodating resistance as Westside prescribes it, run through that workout, see how you feel 2 days later. Then go back a couple days later and do the same thing with straight weight at 75% and get back to me. 75% straight weight, it's not even remotely close to 75% at the top in accommodating resistance. The way your body responds to it, the stimulus, it's night and day. It really is night and day. I mean, a speed work protocol is about as difficult as getting through a few sets of push-ups. It's not substantial enough to really cause any adaptive response, especially in elite lifters. Technique work, we already covered that. Like, oh yeah, it's just a way to get extra touches on the barbell. Well, that'd be fine if they were good touches. They're not good touches because you're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. You're just arbitrarily trying to move it as explosively as possible. Again, because this is a speed prescription, not a recovery prescription. And in that vein, technique goes out the goddamn window. Now, I know what a lot of you are thinking. There's plenty of really good lifters out there who utilize this methodology and they're just fine and they see good results. It's important to know why people see good results. If you are a dedicated lifter and you're aggressive and intense and you are constantly forward motivated and you are lifting very heavy on your lifts multiple times a week and you are doing a ton of volume work, my argument is that that is going to be the driving force for your progress, not the speed work. And the reason that this is important to me, the reason that I even make a video like this, is because of how many people I see who are new. They don't have any direction, they have no coaching or mentorship, they're just going by what they read online. And this is so ubiquitous, it's everywhere you see, that people take for granted that, well, that must just be how you do it. So I see people wasting their time. And Jan Blakely put it best. He said there's an opportunity cost.
It's an opportunity cost. Spending a lot of time with speed work is when you could be spending a lot of time with strength work.
There's only so many hours in the week to train, and everything you do requires some recovery component. So if you're spending your time doing this, there's other more strength specific things you could do, things that are more straightforward, things that will benefit you faster and actually make you more well-rounded. Remember, I've said it once, I've said it 100 times. Stability and coordination comes before speed and power every single time. So when you have a good lifter who does not have their competitive setup really dialed in, when you have a good lifter who hasn't been around long enough to really know the groove and really feel like where the handle is on their lifts, and you have them start clipping away at speed work, you're just putting the cart before the horse there. And that is, in my opinion, not a very productive use of time. Now remember, most of my content is directed towards the 99% of people who are not elite lifters. So I don't want to hear about the person who's advanced and setting records over here when most of this information is being directed towards people that, like I said, are on their own, don't have mentorship, and they're trying to figure things out from scratch.
Something I utilize with my CrossFitters all the time. Regular speed work does not work that great with them due to the fact that these are, a lot of these guys are squatting in the 300 to 400 pound range. And so if they utilize 50% of 400 pounds or utilize 50% of 300 pounds, they're only going to be using 150 to 200 pounds. That is not going to be enough to elicit any sort of great response, even with a band or a chain on there. I don't care how you do it, it's not going to work. It's not going to work out that well. I know because I have tried it with my athletes before, and it just falls short. It's not enough stimulus, it's not enough work, and these guys, these particular athletes, they feel like they're not doing anything.
If you are new, if you are novice, and I would even say intermediate, your time is going to be infinitely better spent with normal hypertrophy protocols, spending a lot of time under tension, mechanically loading, getting comfortable at the bottom, learning how to brace, learning movement mechanics. Tempo work is going to infinitely benefit you more than any amount of speed work will. Now, as we get down into speed work, there's other modes of speed work. Compensatory acceleration is a big one. Now, I'm a fan of this, not all the time, but it definitely has its place. Compensatory acceleration is really just saying going as fast as you can through the whole rep. It doesn't really have a percentage or a load associated with it. It's your warm-up sets, your working sets, your maximal sets. It's all the same. Now, the reason I'm a fan of this is because it gets billed as a speed technique, but I actually think it transcends speed. It's more about learning how to commit to the lift. Remember, grinding is a skill. It's not just about maintaining that force production for a certain period of time. Grinding is a skill, And a lot of people will coast through so many of their reps that they'll forget really how to hit the gas the whole time. And that's what compensatory acceleration fixes. The idea is that just like if you're gonna go 100 meters, you'll sprint. If you're gonna go a mile, you'll just jog. So the same thing, if you're squatting and you're doing a set of 10, you're gonna be very inclined to move nice and slow and even and pace yourself so you can get all 10. If you hit the gas on each one, you're going to condition yourself to go as hard as you can through the entire lift, and that's going to pay off down the road when you are actually in that stick point. So I like compensatory acceleration because as the load gets higher and you start to apply this, we actually are engaging in maximal force production, we actually are engaging in mechanical loading, and we actually are engaging in a sport-specific technique. I heard in person, both from Bill Kazmaier and Leroy Walker, who are both world-class bench pressers, that they really liked very, very high rep sets done in this style. They didn't say this specifically, but they would do each one as fast as possible. So the first few you have essentially your light speed reps. Then as the sets go on, we're going to start to recruit higher threshold motor units. And then as you fatigue, we're really going to start to dig in. And Leroy Walker called them growth reps. When you're at a full substrate deficit, when you start to slow down, when you start to burn, you get to rep 15 or 20. And then there's an actual physiological change that's going to happen. You're going to grow. So you get like the best of all worlds with more efficient nervous system action and the muscular growth that comes with high rep, high intensity work with a compound movement. So big fan of that. Keep in mind though that once again, speed has to come after you establish stability and coordination. So there are actually plenty of protocols that will advise against this. There's a theory that it's not actually the weight for max effort work that requires so much recovery. It's the arousal, it's the hype, it's getting really gassed up and getting the adrenaline going and going balls out. So there was a German coach called Korte who used really high frequency training, and he would forbid his lifters from getting any physical arousal at all. You would just do as much as you can to move the weight. So that way you would recover better and you would get more touches with those percentages without burning yourself out from constantly getting aroused. I've seen Bulgarian systems, which are famous for maxing every day, use a similar prescription where you're maxing every day, but it's a daily max. You're not trying to get super hyped and super amped and go balls out. So that's just a sign of how these principles can be used and waved back and forth in different ways, depending on ultimately what your goal is. If you're confused, don't worry about it. Everybody's confused. There's so many different ways to do things that all have validity in specific ways that you don't have to hold all these ideas in your head at the exact same time. Just get an idea of what it's supposed to do, what its shortcomings are, and when it might be appropriate to do something else. That's really all you have to do. The last point I'm really going to jump to, and this is what kind of had me lean this way from the beginning before I did all of the research and paying attention that kind of led me to this presentation. And it's really how I established my principles from the get-go. It's the faster way to come to good conclusions. And that is by looking at how many success stories you can find. For me to have a strong opinion and run my mouth about something, there's 3 boxes that have to be checked. There has to be a consensus among more accomplished coaches. There has to be a consensus among accomplished athletes. And I myself have to have employed it successfully with myself or someone else. Once those 3 boxes are checked, I feel pretty good having a strong opinion about something. So given my lack of success with speed work is really having any appreciable difference in my training, given the lack of good coaches that use it, and the lack of good athletes that use it. In fact, you got guys like Tusher and Dan Green and Chad Smith who are all very high level lifters and don't think too highly of this protocol. That along with some of the most decorated powerlifting coaches in the world that really don't use this methodology. I mean, think about it this way. Louis pulled his data from Soviet Olympic lifting literature. You would think that the way that the Soviet, now Russian sport system is ran, given their desire to win at all costs, given the national pride they have, you think they would be invested in using their own methodologies. Russian powerlifters don't do this. This is an American phenomenon. So that by itself makes me think, well, maybe the shit is not as cracked up as some people might lead you to believe it is. As I said at the beginning, this is entirely different from general athletic training. Of course, you need to train speed to run fast, to jump high, to throw far. But even that speed can work in very specific ways. The quality needed to throw a baseball 100 miles an hour is different than the quality needed to throw a 50-pound stone 25 feet. So if any of this was confusing, I apologize. The ultimate conclusion of all of this is to keep it simple, stupid. you're gonna be much better off as a newer lifter following the very simple protocols and progressions that you would find in a 1960s muscle rag. Do not overcomplicate it. Do not try to get cutting edge with your training. I promise you, you will only spin your wheels. I'm sure there's gonna be a ton of hate, so leave all your hate in the comment box. There's also gonna be things I forgot to mention or touch upon. If you have anything else that you want me to address, go ahead and leave it in the comments. I really do try to respond to everybody. Thanks again for watching, guys. This is Bromley. Until next time, I'll see ya.